we'll go ahead and get started. I'm Amanda Gulsrud from UCLA Center for Autism Research and Treatment at UCLA, and I will be moderating this follow-up discussion today. We only have about 45 minutes and a lot to cover. We will be talking with Dr. Kathy Lord, who is a distinguished professor here at UCLA and really doesn't need much of an introduction, as she is the developer of many of our gold standard diagnostic techniques. And in particular today, we're going to focus a lot on the Bosa, which is a new instrument that Dr. Lord is developing to help us during this time of social distancing, to help us arrive at better, more accurate, hopefully, clinical and research diagnoses of autism. And so how we're going to run the session today is you all will see a question and answer log on down at the bottom of your prompter. You can feel free to send us questions directly, and I have a team behind me who is going to sort those questions and help me moderate this session. I also have a list of questions that we received from many of you in advance of today. And I'm going to do my best to also get through as many of those questions as I can as well. And just to say, you know, the questions largely are about the Bosa. So we're going to start when I introduce Dr. Kathy Lord. She's going to talk a little bit, refresh our memory about what the Bosa is and training opportunities for that. We're going to open up some question and answer, as well as I'm going to field some of the questions you already sent. And then we can move into, if we have time, kind of more general questions about assessment during this time. And so without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and have Dr. Lord give you an introduction of the Bosa.
Hi, everybody. So I'm not going to re-give the talk I gave the other day, but I'm just going to sort of move from there. But what the Bosa is trying to take things we've learned from the ADOS and from the BOSC, which is a different measure. The BOSC is intended to look at change in response to treatment, short-term changes. But this is really to try to fill a gap that we know exists because people really can't use the ADOS during this time of telehealth and masks and PPE. So the Bosa, the goal of the Bosa is to provide a standardized observation for clinicians of a child or an adult's social behavior. And so what we've done is we've taken what we've learned from the BOSC, which is also a brief observation, and created context in which you can watch a parent interact with a child, or if a child is actually already receiving therapy, you could ask a therapist. But the idea is that the clinician, this doesn't have to be administered by a skilled clinician. It can be administered, and it's intended to be administered by somebody who doesn't have a lot of skill related to diagnosis. It takes about 12 to 16 minutes, depending on the age of the child, and it really involves playing with a child and having brief excerpts of things. So there's for the minimally verbal kids, there's a 4-minute play session, and then 2 minutes of bubbles and 4 minutes of play. For an older child, there's play, there's still bubbles because we want them to get up, and then there's an attempt to have a conversation about a toy. For oldest kids, you actually play, and there are questions that you ask and they ask you as you play with materials. So thanks, Amanda. So let's start with, our goal was to have this usable with anybody at any age and any developmental level. So it's organized a little bit differently from an ADOS, but the definitions are very similar. So minimally verbal is somebody who has single words or very rote phrase speech. So they don't use verbs spontaneously in the sentences that they are creating. And this could be anywhere from very young kids all the way up through adults. And you would use different material just like you would in an ADOS. There's a version, and you would score this on module 1 or on the toddler module of the ADOS. So the idea is that the scoring is done just like an ADOS. You don't total it up like an ADOS, but you use ADOS scores. The second version is for kids or adults with phrase speech. So anybody, any age who has simple sentences, but does not yet use complex sentences and can't carry on a conversation or can't carry on a conversation about something not present. In this group, though, we're also including young fluent speakers. And basically it could go up to as old as age 8, but somewhere between, definitely you need to use this under age 6, and between 6 and 8, you could decide, depending on the sophistication of the child, do you want to use this or do you want to use the version for fluent speech? This would be scored for the kids with phrase speech on a module 2 of the ADOS. And for kids who have fluent speech, you would score it on module 3. Then there's a version for kids and adults with fluent speech. This is scored on either module 3 or module 4, depending on what you would have used if you were giving the module. And it's basically the same version, but the materials are slightly different. And in F1, only the examiner asks questions because we're not sure the kids can read fluently enough to ask questions. And in the F2, both parties ask each other questions. So that is the primary difference. And it's really up to you to decide with kids between 6 and 8 years old who are fluent speakers, if they would do better with free play and then having a conversation about a shared toy, or if they can actually handle a conversation with no materials and can handle asking questions that are very much like ADOS questions. So this is all done in the course of about 16 minutes. And our idea is that you could bring, if you have families who are coming in to your clinic for cognitive testing, which might be done with a mask, you could either before or after, depending on your whole sanitary setup, ask the parent to do this with a child without either wearing a mask. And the clinician would be ideally out of the room, watching through an observation room, videoing this, or they could be far away, so more than 6 feet away, wearing a mask. But this is done by the parents. So it involves both instructions to you, the clinician who's setting it up, and instructions to the parents. But they're pretty simple instructions. This is not as complicated as an ADOS. What you will get out of this is you will get ADOS codes, which we are forcing into binary codes. And by binary, I just mean an ordinary ADOS code is 0, 1, 2, and sometimes 3. We're forcing these into either 0, which means there isn't evidence of this problem, this particular code, or a 1, yes, there is. And how we do this is different, excuse me, for different codes, depending on the distribution, depending on basically how many of non-ASD kids score 1s. So sometimes on ADOS 1 is equal to a 1, and sometimes an ADOS 1 is still equal to a 0 if many, many people without autism often score on this item. We will give you these binary codes, and we're working on these right now. Let me back up a minute, I think, and just say this is intended for clinicians and for researchers. So I think someone had written in and said they'd called WPS, and WPS said it was only for researchers, but that is the BOSC. Right now, the BOSC, which is not this, the BOSC has totally different codes intended to look at change, not diagnosis. So the BOSC is only being offered to researchers. This is for anybody. The criteria though is you do have to be an experienced ADOS user. This is not intended for a new grad student or a psychologist who's never used an ADOS to pick this up, because it will not make any sense. You are also intended to use the ADOS protocols, and as much as possible, we've tried to organize it so you can use ADOS materials. There are some additional things that you have to purchase, and not very expensive, not a whole kit, and we will provide you the links to order these things. It's just a few things. There are also a few things in the ADOS kits right now that we think, because of hospital rules about sanitation, you probably need to replace as well, like cloth things. So when you will get information about this. So we are providing this for free. This does not cost any money. What we are offering, and maybe Amanda, go to the, is we're going to offer trainings over the next couple weeks that you can sign up for. In order to sign up for this training, you have to register at the Autism UCLA site. And you do have to say that you are professionally, ethically competent to do this using an ADOS. Otherwise, that's it, you guys. And this, we will send stuff out. If you have questions, as opposed to wanting to register for this, you can email us at Making Better Measures, which is the little organization that right now holds this as intellectual property. So you can email us there and we will try to answer your question. We're hoping that researchers will work with us to share data, because what we'd like to do is to come up with more standardized cutoffs. This doesn't give you a cutoff like an ADOS with the CSS scores. We just don't want to do that when the data that we've used so far to construct this has mostly been from actual ADOSs. So we would really like researchers to agree to send us de-identified data so we can put what everybody's done together, and perhaps if we need to, if we're all still in this situation in another 6 months, we could actually generate standard scores that people could use in research. But for clinicians, you can use it. There are no deals about this except that you need to honestly say you are a competent ADOS user. So those are the two trainings that we've scheduled now. If we need to do more, we can do more. Let me stop and Amanda, turn the show back to you and ask me some questions.
Okay, great. I am going to stop sharing the slide. Actually, I guess we could continue to share the slide so that if people log in, they can see when the trainings are going to happen, because I know the majority of the questions that we got in advance really had to do with getting access to this new protocol and making sure that clinicians are trained. And so just to clarify a few questions that you haven't really hit on yet, Kathy, that have to do with the Bosa is, one group was asking, is this available for international use as well? Will there be any restrictions? What would your answer to that?
Yeah, no, there aren't. I think the restriction would just be that it has to be, you have to use a published ADOS protocol. So if you are using ADOSs in Spanish or French or German or Danish, you could do this, or you could do this as well. And the materials are, I think, probably not, this doesn't involve, for example, the pictures from the ADOS or some of the things that are highly culture specific. So that is fine. I know WPS has complicated rules about translation. But you would have a translated ADOS in front of you. And I guess what we would ask you is maybe you could you could translate the, if you are giving this to people that can't read English, then we would ask you to send your translation to us so we can see it. But I think this is just for, so we have a copy for it. This is not a requirement.
Okay, great. Wonderful. And then a few follow-up questions I just want to clarify. So if folks sign up for one of these two trainings, at least initially, will they, after completing this training, have everything they need in terms of the protocol and how to score and transfer scores to be able to do this, as long as they're a competent ADOS 2 provider?
So you will get descriptions of the instrument, and then our postdocs will walk you through how to do this with some examples. You will still have to purchase a few new things, because there's different materials, for example, for the conversation, for the PSYF group. There are different materials for the play or social interaction for module 3 and 4. So you will need to order those. Then we are working right now, literally right now, on giving you a DSM-5 checklist where the items are sorted into the different DSM-5 categories. What we haven't computed in a final way is those binary codes, like offers comfort. If you give the child a 0, they're going to get a 0. But if you give them a 1, does that mean you code it, yes, that's a deficit is present, or not? We are running analyses on a very large data set that we have of the ADOS from a variety of different people to try to estimate that. That we don't have. We hope we'll have it in the next couple days. So if you do the training on Wednesday, you will get everything except that final checklist, and then hopefully we'll get that out in the next couple days.
Great. And as a follow-up, I'm seeing some questions come in regarding people who are already going to the website and trying to register for the training. And I believe I can jump in here and let you know that the link will be live very soon. It is not live yet. I'm sorry. We are all working as fast as we can to get this to you. I know Dr. Lord's group is working overtime. And that registration link should be available later today, at the latest tomorrow morning. And I don't believe there will be any cap on who can attend the training. Is that right, Kathy? So as long as you register, as many of you as we can accommodate, there are a lot, right?
Yeah, it's fine.
Okay. I don't want people to feel frantic that they need to check every 5 minutes to register. We will have room for you at one of those trainings for sure. So keep checking back. Someone else is asking if slides will be sent from the previous webinar or today. I think we can probably discuss that. And definitely get some of that sent out to you. No problem.
Yeah, we could, I mean, I guess Monica could post the slides from last time and from today. That would be fine.
Mm-hmm. Here's a good question from Prior about the Bosa. If this assessment tool will be available, does the team plan to release a short introductory video for parents to watch before participating in the activities? This may be helpful with standardizing. Just a thought.
Yes, I mean, we're working on it right now. You want to be careful, because you don't want to imply to parents that this is how you act. You don't want parents to feel like they're being tested and they have to be as good as your best clinician. But we are working on very brief videos that basically show how you lay materials out, and then what happens, for example, if you're with a younger child and they get up and walk away, what should you do? And then with the older kids, it's really not hard. I mean, this is all intended to be simple, but it is the case that we have a pile of questions that you're going to ask. the child. And then with the older kids, they have a pile of questions. And then you're doing this while you're playing an interactive game like Jenga, or a game with marbles that fall down. So we want to be able to show somebody a 1-minute clip of this is how these things work. So yes, we will have those.
Okay, great. And another question that's come in is regarding cost. So is there a cost for the training? And then what would the cost be for administering? I think 2 separate things. So is there a cost for the actual training?
At this point, there's no cost for us. We're not charging a thing. So you can come to the training free and you can use this to your heart's content without paying us anything. You will have to buy a couple of new toys. And we did ask, let me back up a little bit. It is possible that you could do this via telehealth if you sent materials out to families. For module 3 and 4, or the version for basically version F1 and F2, that isn't that much stuff, but there's quite a lot of stuff that you take out of ADOS kits in the versions for minimally verbal and the phrase speech young fluent kids. So we wondered, would you want to take stuff out of your ADOS kit and send it to a family? Probably most of us not. But the reality is WPS is not going to make up special kits for this. You can order all the individual materials. It costs a small fortune, I'll just warn you. It's like $500. So you do just have to judiciously decide if you're going to do a lot of these where you're sending them, you'll have to figure out a way to do that. But otherwise, this is free. This is not a profit-making enterprise at all.
Okay, great. That answers a lot of questions that are coming in. And just to clarify, the 2 trainings on Wednesday, June 24th and Monday, June 29th, are they a repeat of the same training, or do people need to attend both of these trainings?
They're the same training done twice.
Okay,
so
great.
We wanted to give you 2 different times that are possible.
Great. So for everyone who's asking those great questions, you only need to attend one of those trainings for the Bosa.
I should have said also right at the start, so Bosa stands for Brief Observation of Symptoms of Autism. And I think what we're trying to say here is this isn't an ADOS. And those of you, use ADOS users, you'll see this and you'll think, what? If I did an ADOS, this is not what I'd be doing. And I'm dying to know what would happen if I paused, or what would happen. It doesn't do that. But what we're trying to do is just take advantage of the fact that for the BOSC, we've been futzing around for years now, trying to come up with little contexts that allow us to see social behavior that might change. So we just wanted to take advantage of that, and the fact that there are all of you out there who do use the ADOS and can use that information and see what we can get from it. So it will take some getting used to. It doesn't give you the same information as an ADOS, but it seemed more structured than many of the things that people are doing. And it also does give you a chance to see a parent interact with a child, which I think is important anyway.
Great. And another important question, for adults, I'm assuming the administrator just needs to be someone familiar to him and not necessarily the parent.
Yes.
Also, it seems, okay, good. Also, it seems there will be varying levels of prior familiarity across administrations and people. Not sure how to address this.
Yes, I mean, I think you do need to keep that in mind in interpreting the scores. I mean, with the BOSC, where we have a lot of data, what we've said is that just needs to be held constant over time, from time 1 to time 2, because the BOSC, the scores don't mean anything. You're just looking at change. Here, you will have to keep in mind how much somebody knows. But we have literally done hundreds of these with people that don't know the child, and it does work fine. So the issue is more just how comfortable people feel. So we really want, if we ask parents, or you ask a therapist who's an ABA therapist, who may be very skilled in lots of things, but not doing ADOSs, we need to try to get across the point that what we're interested in is seeing the child, not them. And we want to see the child interact in a comfortable way without prompting. And that's the main message. And so we're giving you things to do that will keep this interaction going for 15 minutes. And so we're going to keep you pretty busy, but just keep the child engaged, but please don't try to teach them something or make them do something. And generally that works.
Great. Another question coming in, can the parents use their own toys instead of the minimally verbal version?
You could try to put a version together from what the parents have, but I don't think I would let them completely use their own toys. Partly they will be familiar, which does make a difference. And so they're going to just be more loaded. So I think we are stuck with putting together a kit.
Okay. Will there be any psychometric data made available about the Bosa? I know it is so new.
Yeah, well, we don't have any psychometric data. We have, from the Bosa. So that's why we're asking researchers to agree to contribute their data. Our hope, I mean, we've had probably about 10 pretty big research sites express interest in this. So if everyone uses it and we put our data together, we hope that in a few months, we could come up with something. We're also going to code, we have existing BOSCs and ADOSs from really a number of kids around New York City. So we hope we can also generate some psychometrics there. But right now we just don't have any.
And that's also a reason why potentially larger research groups who are interested in sharing data with you in a de-identified way, that would be useful, correct?
Yes, I mean, it's really, we would love that. And we think we can get some in the course of a few months if people send us their data. And if we use existing videos of what we've got.
Good. So this next question is kind of a bridge to some other questions we got, which has to do with just in general some clinical assessments, but in particular with the Bosa, this person is wondering, would the Bosa be a good substitute for the ADOS in a multidisciplinary assessment of ASD in a child under 5 years of age?
I don't think it's not really a substitute for an ADOS. I mean, it's a gap measure. So it is not going to give you the same information that an ADOS does. So I think in a multidisciplinary assessment, where kids are seeing one person after another, sometimes it is hard because you think, gosh, they've already done this. Like the speech pathologist did the ESCS or something. So do I really have to repeat joint attention? So I think, that is a question, but I'm not sure this is going to fill the answer. You'll see when you see it, because the clinician is so much more passive. I mean, you really are just watching this.
Got it. And so similarly then, this question about ultimately, could the Bosa be used as an alternative to the ADOS post-COVID-19? Similar answer. We don't think it's going to work in exactly comparable ways. Correct? Or
right. I mean, it's possible that as people use it, they enjoy it because it gives you a way to watch parents with their kids in a little bit more structured way. I don't think it's probably going to replace the ADOS because it doesn't involve the tiny contexts, social context that the ADOS has throughout it. I mean, they just aren't there. And so I think this is something different. This is really free. It's almost free play, but with slight modifications.
Yeah, and I think another good point by this person is that, maybe it could be used as an ADOS brief, kind of equivalent to like a Wasi to a whisk or
yeah, I don't think so. I don't think that's what this is going to be. It's not like taking the 4 most important contexts in the ADOS and doing those and not doing the other 4. It really is different.
Right. Okay, that's useful. All right, I'm looking through, still getting questions coming in. How does the Bosa compare to other remote measures, such as the Vanderbilt ASD Telepedes measure for young kids? You
I,
talked a little bit about that on the
yeah,
talk.
I don't know a lot about the Vanderbilt measure. My understanding is it's for very small kids, I think under 3.
Yeah,
So
2 to 3
this is,
years. Mm-hmm.
part of the reason we sort of jumped in here was not to compete with them, but to provide stuff for kids that are older. I think both the SORF and the ASD Peds are for tiny kids. I do think that those are more convenient because you don't have to provide materials for families. So I think that's a strength. I think this is less onerous for the family if you actually put together a kit, or you can see them for 15 minutes, you know, outside or whatever. I think that this is shorter. I mean, and it's not getting them to run around and video their kids. It's a briefer, more structured observation. But I think there are real strengths to those approaches. NODA, which has been around for a long time, is another approach. So I don't think we're saying this is the end all be all of the answer. Is just one thing that you could do if you're feeling frustrated about not being able to do ADOSs.
Okay. Um, okay, so some questions about overall your feeling about, can you finalize an ASD assessment? So I'm assuming clinically using the Bosa.
I think not without an ADI or without a really good parent interview. So I should have said that from the start. So the intention here is that you do a serious parent interview, and whether that's an ADI or something else, I don't want to specify, but I think it needs to be a really good diagnostic interview, and probably really an ADI and a Vineland, or you at least need to get adaptive information. You also need cognitive testing, and there may be times when you proceed on without it and basically say, come back when this is over and we've got to get cognitive testing. So I would never finish an eval without having cognitive information. I think with some kids, this may be sufficient in addition to information from the parents. And cognitive information and adaptive information. So there will be some kids that with a Bosa, you are quite sure they have autism. There will be other kids you are not sure at all. And I think we've tried, in the materials we've prepared, we've tried to give you examples of both of those, of where you would say, look, this kid has autism, this kid doesn't have autism, and I don't know, and I'm gonna need more information. So I think we're hoping, just from the data that we have of the ADOS, that, often, there certainly are some kids where a single instrument is sufficient. But there are other kids where it's not. So I think you just have to really be honest with families and yourself of when this is going to work and when it's not.
Okay, good. And then similar to, questions we've had about how to use this clinically and in the research settings, one person is asking, will the design of the Bosa provide enough information to satisfy enough domains for a DSM-5 diagnosis and or school checklist? So how could you use this in combination with all your other measures to arrive at a DSM-5 clinical diagnosis?
So we have laid out, and you'll get basically a short version of the DSM-5 criteria. It is like an ADOS in that you're not going to see restricted and repetitive behaviors for all kids who have them. So basically, like an ADOS, if you see them, you can score them, and that would be good. But there may be kids who absolutely have other repetitive behaviors that you don't ever see. So that's why we're saying you really may need a parent interview. It's very likely. You also don't have history, and technically we're supposed to be making autism diagnoses using history. So if you have a child who absolutely socially looks as autistic as you can be, you don't need to go back and get the history from that. But if you don't, or you're wondering, you're going to need to follow up on that. So I think that, again, there are going to be cases where this is sufficient. There are going to be some cases where you're going to need information, particularly about repetitive behaviors, from some other source. And that we acknowledge.
Good. Okay, do we think, for research purposes, is it appropriate to use the Bosa to confirm diagnosis for eligibility? What about as an outcome measure?
Yeah, I mean, I think I probably wouldn't use it as an outcome measure unless your outcome is supposed to be a clinical diagnosis. And then I think I would still use a clinical diagnosis. But we will give you numbers, and that it may be that you can interpret those numbers at some point. But it isn't the outcome measure I would pick. I think for a clinical diagnosis, the idea is that we're trying to lay out the information with as much psychometric data as we can, basically from an ADOS, to help you know when you could safely say, for example, for a particular item, that where the sensitivity, say module 3, asking information, the sensitivity is like 0.8 and the specificity is 0.8, that's a good item. But there may be other items where, and so there you could make a cutoff between 0 and 1. On the other hand, there are other items. For example, in module 2, you could have an item like imagination and creativity, where most, many kids who have other kinds of delays don't show much imagination. So what we're trying to do is give you information about where you make that dividing line so that it is more psychometrically valid than somebody who just cooks up a list of DSM-5, which really has no psychometric validity whatsoever. So we're trying to do that to meet criteria both for research and for example, insurance companies' eligibility issues, so that they will take this more seriously. But it isn't, we have a lot of data based on the ADOS. We don't have a lot of data yet based on the Bosa. So that's what we will be trying to get.
Good. I think it's important to reiterate, I don't think we did today, although we talked about it a lot a couple of weeks ago. Someone is asking, what do you think would be more helpful clinically? An ADOS that is not scored, but used for observations, or a Bosa? So we might want to just reframe why we think the ADOS is hard to use right now.
Yeah, I mean, we just have very serious concerns about ADOSs that are done with masks or PPE. It is we have all sorts of data that subtle changes in examiners, for example, having a very thick accent, or just doing slight differences results, wearing Google glasses results in different amounts of eye contact, different amounts of facial expression, different amounts of gesture. So I really worry about doing ADOSs, and just making a clinical judgment. I mean, I think if you really wanted to, you could do both and see, because this will be more standardized than that, in the sense that ideally people who shouldn't be acting strange because of PPE. But I just, and maybe in a year from now, if we're all wearing PPE, maybe it won't be that strange, but it covers people's mouths. It covers your mouth, it's going to cover their mouth. And that's a huge issue in terms of both hearing and seeing half your face.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's important to reiterate here for those that maybe weren't on the call a couple of weeks ago. How do items get scored based on mental age without cognitive testing? Is cognitive testing such as the Mullen with PPE considered appropriate even if validity is compromised?
We don't know. I mean, I think our group is going to try, but I think we just haven't had enough experience with it to say for sure. I think we're more hopeful that you can get something out of cognitive testing, at least nonverbal stuff. But we honestly don't know. I think you probably, I mean, that's a place where a Vineland would be helpful, you know, where making some kind of judgment of a developmental level that's not asking parents to, you know, give you an age level, which should give you a start. But you're right, it's definitely a concern.
One question that I think I can answer pretty quickly, can this be done fully remotely with an administrator conducting the assessment via Zoom? And I think Dr. Lord mentioned that yes, in fact, you can even mail the kit home and Zoom in with the family and, you know, set them up for this, correct?
But they would administer it. So
it
wouldn't be you administering it by Zoom. It would be you sending it to them, and they can do it in front of you, and you watch via Zoom. You can help them. I mean, you could say 4 minutes, you know, get out this, 4 minutes is up. All right, now blow the bubbles. So you can do that, but you can't actually administer the questions yourself. The parents need to do it, and you're judging the interaction there, not with you in Zoom, but between the parent or whoever, I mean, who's there. If you have a therapist who is seeing the child, you know, at home.
And a question about, could school staff familiar with the child do this interaction with the child?
Yeah, so we've actually been doing this with one of the programs at UCLA, and it's gone really well. The school, I mean, we had to hold back the school staff because they are, you know, they're used to trying to get the best out of the kids. And we're trying to say, don't do that, don't cause problems, but you're not pulling for the thing that you want them to say. But the school staff has done a beautiful job. So I think absolutely you could do that.
Okay, good. And someone joining us from the UK is wondering if these scores will link with the ICD-10 as well as the DSM.
I mean, I would say you should just convert it yourself, because DSM-5 is so similar to ICD-10. It's so similar. So it absolutely will.
Okay. And a question that actually we got from written in, and also I see coming up here in the live Q&A, it has to do with people wondering if you can do parts of the ADOS remotely. So people wondering, can I as a clinician deliver like the emotion questions of the mod 3 or 4 over telehealth and get some amount of information?
Yeah, there's nothing to stop you from doing that. I mean, I asked WPS because technically they own the ADOS, and they said as long as you use a protocol, that is fine. You just can't code it or score it as an ADOS. And in your report, you should say, I administered 5 questions from the ADOS. So what we have done in this, and it's why we had to go through WPS to get permission, is in module 3 and 4, we do use ADOS questions as well as other questions. So you probably shouldn't do that and this, because you'll have some of the same questions. And the idea is really that you get more information if the parents can ask than if you're asking. But you are welcome to take parts of the ADOS and just don't overstate what you've got.
Got it. And people trying to find any way to do the ADOS with masks, wondering, you know, your thoughts about using one of those clear see-through masks.
The problem with the clear masks is they don't protect anybody from anything except you from splatter from the person. So they're intended to be worn over the surgical mask. Mm-hmm. So you can't, I mean, otherwise you would have to have actually a plastic, I mean, some restaurants and gyms are having these plastic things right now. That I think you can't do, because you can't pass things back and forth. I mean, the minute you're scooting something through a little hole at somebody who's behind a plastic screen, it's a different social encounter. So I think the plastic masks, first of all, are not safe without regular PPE behind them. And second of all, are also just too strange.
Right, so that's the facial shield. Right. And someone I think was asking, there are these face masks that like
Oh, right.
speech therapists use that are clear.
Right.
So, you know,
I,
those
I
might
would,
work for cognitive testing, but still kind of
right.
weird for.
Yeah, I would be very skeptical, you guys, just because it's like wearing a hat, you know, on your head. I mean,
Right. Good. Okay. Well, we are at time, Kathy, for this. It is a little after 2. I think we've gotten through the majority of the questions. I mean, I think the big thing is that there will be a training coming up in this next week, actually in the next 2 days, for folks to keep checking the website to register in advance for that, where you'll get all the details about the protocol and scoring and the materials that are required of the Bosa. And just that, this is something I know your group has thought a lot about, and it's an alternative right now, given that, the ADOS is going to be tricky to use for quite some time. So I know it's a new measure, but I think it's exciting for clinicians and researchers to think about options right now that allow us all to still be socially distant. And so I know I look forward to using it in clinic and research settings. Please email makingbettermeasures@gmail.com if you have further follow-up questions. And I think we look forward to seeing you all at a training soon. Kathy, is there anything else you'd like to say before we wrap up?
yeah, I don't think so. I mean, I think you guys let us know if you try it, what happens, because I think we are open to feedback. I mean, what WPS has asked us to do is when you register, you have to sign a statement that you are going to use this as intended. You're not going to fiddle with it, because then it does turn into something that's not standardized at all. And part of the logic of doing this in a standardized way is to be able to address eligibility, insurance issues, and research. And so don't change it. But I think if you have thoughts about it, let us know, because we are, basically we're trying to fill a gap here, and we hope this will help.
All right, everyone, take care, and we look forward to seeing you at a training soon.